I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Salvati. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. Sabrina Salvati.
All right. Happy Sunday, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Sab's podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you're new, I want to let you know that Sab's podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays for the Sabby and JB show, and you can catch me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and every other Sunday. I want to give a shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, Twitter, and Rumble. And welcome back, guys. We do have a special guest. I'm going to bring him in just a second. Really quick, I do want to let you know what we are discussing tonight for the program. Interesting day for news, ladies and gentlemen, as you can imagine. Tonight, we are discussing Andrew Cuomo for mayor. No, that is not a joke. We will get into his announcement and the problems that can come from that. We're also going to discuss Piers Morgan versus George Galloway. That is an epic takedown there by George Galloway, I think, in my opinion. We're also going to discuss, and this is interesting, Tim Walz has a little bit of a flip here against the Democratic Party. Apparently, Tim Walz is not too happy with the way events transpired during that presidential election, and you're going to hear about that. So he's coming forward. And last but not least, of course, we are going to discuss the Epstein sham. We're going to talk about that with journalist Derek Bros. And we have a bonus story, which is, if you have not heard, ladies and gentlemen, Israel is implementing starvation as a pushback against Hamas. So that is breaking news today. We will get into all of that. And tonight's theme is cats out the bag. Let's go ahead and bring in our special guest here. He is a journalist. He has also worked with, of course, excellent journalist Whitney Webb. Let's go ahead and bring in Derek Bros. What's going on, Derek? Welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me back. I appreciate it. How are you?
How are you? Thank you so much for coming on. I think we want to kick things off with this Epstein situation. I have a clip here I want to show everybody if you guys have not seen this. This is after the release of the Epstein binders. Of course, this clip here on Fox News is very telling. Everyone listen to this.
Last night on Jesse Watters Primetime, Attorney General Pam Bondi said this.
What you're going to see hopefully tomorrow is a lot of flight logs, a lot of names, a lot of information, but it's pretty sick what that man did.
So we were looking today to find out more about why the government's been so suspiciously protective of Jeffrey Epstein. This afternoon, a bunch of conservative influencers left a meeting at the White House with binders that said the Epstein files, phase 1. Once the binders were opened, people were able to see flight records and Epstein's Rolodex and a list of masseuses. The masseuses' names were blacked out, and the information from the flight logs wasn't new. Neither was the Rolodex. When we began to feel duped, Pam Bondi released a letter that says, basically, I was duped too. In the letter addressed to FBI Director Kash Patel, Bondi basically says, I asked you for the full and complete files related to Jeffrey Epstein. I received 200 pages of documents. I asked if These were all the documents, and the FBI said yes. Late yesterday, I learned from a source at the FBI field office in New York was in possession of thousands of pages of documents related to the investigation and the indictment of Epstein. Despite my repeated requests, the FBI never disclosed the evidence of these files.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. I'm sure you're very familiar with this, Derek. But I just want to bring you in here because I think when some people, I noticed this on social media, they really thought that they were going to see something that they haven't seen before that wasn't already public information. Meanwhile, when this is released, I think people like me and also yourself had predicted that they're really not going to give you the names of the clients. So I want to hear, like, what do you think about what Pam Bondi is saying here? Now she's trying to accuse the FBI for not giving all of the information.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of threads here to pull on. For one, I've seen this narrative forming that it's the Southern District of New York that is, or the elements within the FBI that are either deleting files or trying to prevent the release of them. I've seen this speculated on in some right-leaning Trump-supporting podcasts with no evidence, to be clear, like no evidence to make that. Now, of course, it's not that hard to imagine that somebody within the FBI or elsewhere could want this information gone, but I don't think they would be waiting to the last minute to get rid of it if that was the case. I also think that there is a lot of hype, as you noted, like a lot of hype and buildup around this. I find it highly suspicious and telling that the binders that were first given to the people before they were the information was even posted on the AG's website was to these right-wing influencers, some of who are ex-intelligence, allegedly ex, and also Zionists. And if you understand the research behind the Epstein network, going to Les Wexner, going to the mega group, there's a huge Israeli Zionist connection there. And most of us believe that Epstein was likely working for the Mossad and maybe the CIA as well, but that there's definitely some Israel connections in there. So I find that kind of telling that the first people they gave them to were people who maybe could help craft the narrative. Thankfully, most people have seen this for what it is, that it's a nothing burger, there's nothing new. In fact, I was posting after it started to come out that this is all stuff you can find. I mean, obviously our mutual friend and colleague, Whitney Webb, she's got a whole book on this, but I did a documentary back in 2018, so almost 7 years ago, called Bringing Down Jeffrey Epstein. And this was September 2018. I actually went to Epstein's Palm Beach house and filmed a scene outside of his house. This was because I'd been following the case since 2016, looking at the original arrest in 2005. And much of the stuff that people are kind of bringing up today, you can find in my documentary from 2018. I mean, there's bits and pieces of details here and there, some new names, but there's no smoking gun. There's no big bombshells. There's no new names to point to. I mean, if anything, there might be some things that are inconvenient. For example, they did post we've already had Epstein's own black book for years. That's in my documentary from 2018. And by the way, there was 16 numbers of Donald Trump inside Epstein's black book. But we hadn't had Ghislaine Maxwell's own black book, and that was released through this. And again, some of the stuff they're releasing is redacted, but it's actually already in the public record, unredacted. So that's what I thought was kind of weird as well, is they're redacting certain things that we can find elsewhere. But I did find it interesting that Trump is also listed with quite a few numbers. They're all redacted, of course, in Maxwell's black book as well. But other than that, there really isn't anything new. They're claiming this is just phase one, so we'll see, but I'm not holding my breath.
Right, because I think that people need to look at who they really want to protect here. Anthony said Rickroll, like they Rickrolled people. But I think people need to look at, like, who are they really trying to protect? And I want to get into a little bit more about who Jeffrey Epstein actually was. And I know, Whitney Webb has talked about this before, that obviously he connected to the Mossad there. There has been a lot of, I would say, pushback against people like Alan Dershowitz, who was Epstein's lawyer, for defending him, and still to this day continuing to defend Jeffrey Epstein. But Alan Dershowitz was also on that island. And I want to get like more perspective about who do you feel Jeffrey Epstein really was, and why was he doing what he was doing? Yeah,
so there's some different theories, I'll say, on who exactly was working, like I alluded to earlier. There's clearly a Mossad connections. There's clearly some connections to intelligence. Even during the first Trump administration, whenever Trump's, I think he was the labor secretary at the time, Alex Acosta, he was questioned during his confirmation hearing because he was actually originally involved in Florida, involved in the original sweetheart deal for Jeffrey Epstein. So, when you talk about Trump and Epstein's relationship, I find that telling that the lawyer who helped craft Epstein's sweetheart deal back in the 2005, 2007 during his first arrest, he gets appointed as Trump's labor secretary during his first administration. And during his confirmation hearing, they asked him about this. And he admitted, he's like, I was told that he's intelligence and that, it's above my pay grade, basically. So these things have been acknowledged out in the open. And of course, the corporate media, they don't do any actual investigative work to dig further into those details. And I think even in the independent alternative media, I think this is one thing I would say as a longtime Epstein researcher, that it's unfortunate that the victims, which I think obviously could be the survivors, let's say, should be more of our focus, because people are so obsessed with the salacious names, which celebrities, which politicians, like, who's implicated in this. And obviously we want to get to the truth, but I feel like it kind of becomes a spectacle in itself. Like, is Tom Hanks going to be listed in there as Bill Gates or whoever, and sort of forgetting about the victims who were victimized by Jeffrey Epstein. But with that said, his relationship with Les Wexner is, I think, the one that really people should key in on if they don't know much about it. Les Wexner is, of course, the founder of the limited brands Victoria's Secret. He's based in Ohio. And as I mentioned, the Mega Group, there's very little mainstream reporting about the Mega Group. But if you guys go search Mega Group, Les Wexner, you'll find an old article from the mid 2000s. I think it was Wall Street Journal, maybe one of the other ones. And they talk about this in their own words, that this is a wealthy group of Jewish financiers whose goal is to, support Israel and promote Zionism. And they had occasional meetings. We don't know a whole lot about them, but we know Les Wexner was the one who sold Jeffrey Epstein his New York mansion. The claim is for $1, or that he essentially gave it to him for free. And there's also some speculation that they may have had some sort of romantic relationship. And Wexner at one point, I think in the last couple of years, he had to apologize, like make some brief, like, oh, I didn't know anything about that, because he was handling Epstein's money. But then that's sort of just where it's left. Nobody has, in the mainstream especially, has dug in further and gone to question Wexner about this or interview him about this. He's still largely based in Ohio. And as I've covered in some of my past reporting, there is some really interesting connections that go back to the mafia in Cleveland and in Ohio, and how some of that overlaps with this sort of Zionist support group that Wexner is connected to. There's a bunch of threads that Whitney has pulled on a few of them, quite a few of them, obviously, but there's still so much about the story that we don't really know. And I think that's what's more important to me than just sort of what celebrities are listed in. Obviously, if somebody's listed in one of the trips to the island or as having received a massage, they should be questioned publicly. And I think that's the role of us as independent journalists, because the corporate media is not going to do it. But that doesn't automatically mean somebody was guilty of abusing a child. It doesn't really tell us much. It's like more, but it's just sort of breadcrumbs. And I think that's ultimately what we're witnessing, is a sort of limited hangout operation, give people more things to obsess about. Like, are we going to finally get this Epstein list? When my belief is that the files, the videos, and all the different documentation that was collected from Epstein's house back in the mid 2000s when his house was first raided, some of those clips you can find online, just very small clips of them walking through his house. But any other detailed files, video files of abuse, those are probably sitting in some safe in the Mossad or the CIA. I doubt they're just sitting there in a box waiting to be discovered at the FBI and then they're just going to be released in the Trump administration. My belief is those would have either been destroyed or protected at a very high level. And I also don't think we should assume that the manipulation, the blackmail that would come as a result of these sort of massage operations and abuse of children, that is likely still going on, that there are politicians and other famous people who probably have videos of themselves doing things that they don't want out, and they are still being used to serve whatever agendas of those who are in possession of them.
That is very well said. And you mentioned Lex, and I want to bring up something else about him. And one of the documentaries that I saw, it also stated that some of the Victoria's Secret models had complained about Jeffrey Epstein as well. I don't know if everybody's aware of that, but there were complaints made about him back then. And they said that he made them feel very uncomfortable. There was another model back then that said that he, assaulted her. It wasn't the first. The Lex estate in Ohio, there was a younger girl who came forward, went to the police back then and complained that she was assaulted by Jeffrey Epstein in Ohio. So even before, he became more known in these prominent circles, there were complaints and reports about Jeffrey Epstein. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, in the documentary I saw where Lex goes, "Well, I didn't know that was going on." They also interviewed the models who said, well, he did know what was going on because we complained to him. We told him what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. So just FYI for those who may not be aware.
Could I add one point to that there on just the modeling? You bring up I'm glad you mentioned that. I kind of touched on Victoria's Secret, but for those who are not aware, Victoria's Secret fashion shows, runways, models, etc. I wrote an article a few years back for The Last American Vagabond called "The Fashion to Abuse Pipeline," something along those lines, because it's sort of a common way that these types of abusers will get in there. And obviously Les Wexner, sometimes Ghislaine Maxwell was representing herself as a modeling recruit. And obviously this is what they would tell some of the young girls. It's like, oh, well, we know all these famous people and Jeffrey has money and we can get you, modeling gigs and things of that sort. There's also another important component of this whole Epstein network. We've mentioned Jeffrey Epstein, of course, Ghislaine Maxwell. Her father, Robert Maxwell, was a British undercover agent and suspected of being a double agent with the Mossad, who died under mysterious circumstances. Then we have Les Wexner, but there's also Jean-Luc Brunel, who was more well-known in France, and it got less coverage in the States and sort of in the Western Hemisphere because most people have never heard of him. But this was another one of the recruiting gentlemen, one of the people who used modeling, like you're describing with Victoria's Secret, to recruit women in. He was arrested by the French authorities, I think in 2022, maybe 2023, in relation to his crimes for the Epstein network. And wouldn't you guess it, he allegedly killed himself while in prison. And so Jeffrey Epstein allegedly killed himself. Jean-Luc Brunel allegedly killed himself. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison, minimum security prison. Les Wexner is essentially walking free. And many of the pilots who helped fly these planes, we know their names. They're out in the public. They haven't been charged for their roles and these sort of, transferring, essentially trafficking people across, to the island and elsewhere between Jeffrey Epstein's properties. And so there's still just a lot of threads that haven't been pulled. And I think that what I'm sort of been posting about and pushing back against is this idea that a lot of the Trump crowd and the MAGA crowd and even others are like thinking this is the grand reveal, this is disclosure, we're about to get the MLK files and the RFK files and whatever else, and now we're getting the Epstein files, and who knows what's to come. But I would suspect that if they had some kind of bombshells, they would have started with them. They would have here's the biggest piece of information. Instead, we get a rehash of information that's already on the public record, that's already been known for those who've been paying attention. And so I don't think there's going to be anything new there. But I do encourage people who don't know enough about this network. You can visit my website, theconsciousresistance.com. We have a whole page of all my reporting since 2016 on Epstein. And look up Jean-Luc Brunel. Look up some of the his modeling agency, I believe, is called M Squared. And I actually found an old CBS 60 Minutes report. I want to say it was 1992, but sometime in the early 90s that came out, or at least it was recorded, and it was allegedly only aired one time and then never shown again. But this was that's how far back, like you said, Epstein was accused, even going back to Ohio with the models of sort of trying to abuse women or doing things. Jean-Luc Brunel, the same thing. These women were saying that there's something going on. There was a lot of women coming from Eastern Europe who were being brought in as quote unquote models and were clearly being trafficked. And I also think it's worth acknowledging that Trump had a modeling agency as well. He was ahead of the Miss Universe pageant, I think it was, or Miss World or something back in the 90s. And there's stories that you can find, older articles that are getting harder and harder to find, that also some of those models would say things like Trump would just kind of walk in their changing rooms while they're just, getting dressed, whatever, just different things. Again, not saying there's proof for sure of abuse there on Trump's part, but you see the same sort of network of a modeling agency, association with Jeffrey Epstein. We know, I just think that still, in my mind, from my perspective, and I think the evidence shows that Trump is still getting a huge pass from a lot of people. And it's actually unfortunate that some of my reporting is used in that way, because in 2018, 2017, I went to Florida for one of Jeffrey Epstein's many cases. This is before he was actually arrested. And I was there at the courtroom. He didn't show up, of course, but it was just one of the procedural hearings. And I got to interview Bradley Edwards, who is the lead attorney who's been defending the women since 2005, so for 20 years now. And I asked him, a few questions. And in his words, he told me that after Epstein was arrested, which I think is an important detail, Trump was willing to get on the phone with him and tell him any information he knew. And so a lot of Trump supporters, and including Fox News, have taken that clip of my interview and used that as a way to sort of say, see, Trump was the only one fighting against the bad guys. But two things I'll note on that. This happened after Epstein's arrest. So of course, after he's been exposed, everybody's jumping ship and saying, oh, we don't want anything to do with him. We have nothing to do with him. But that didn't stop Trump from having a 20-year relationship with him. And he didn't share any of this information under oath or officially on the record. Okay, great. The lawyer says he shared some information over the phone, but I do think those are two important details. But nevertheless, there's a lot of people, I think, who sort of view that Trump is totally, has no relationship, and anybody, making that connection is just TDS, blah, 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 whatever.
Yeah, I think a big part of the thing is like nobody wants like their person or their, I don't know what you want to call it, but like someone that they admire or whatever, they don't want them to be seen in that light, or they don't want to believe it. But to your point about the models, I think this is important to mention as well. Last year, it was revealed that even Abercrombie and Fitch were also participating in trafficking. So this was another one, and it makes you wonder about like all of those modeling agencies. To your point, I guess I kind of wasn't surprised when the story came out with Abercrombie and Fitch, because there was a lot of criticism about the way they were choosing to use the models during the time when it was really popular, or during the height of its popularity. There was criticism during that time, but they were another one. That it has been revealed that they were participating in trafficking as well. And to your point about people being named, I think this is another thing that I've brought up as well. If someone is on the flight list, that doesn't necessarily mean that they participated in the crimes.
Absolutely. That's important, because if we're trying to be truly objective and factual, that doesn't look good that you were hanging out with Epstein, right? But we also know that Epstein and Maxwell, part of their whole thing was trying to ingratiate themselves within academia, scientists, celebrities, and like Epstein at one point even said that his favorite thing to do was to collect people. Like he sort of looked at it that way, that he was making all these contacts and making sure that he had this big, broad network. And so being at a party with Epstein, taking a picture, that alone doesn't necessarily implicate somebody in child abuse, trafficking, etc. Getting a flight with him from New York to his ranch in New Mexico or stuff like that, that doesn't really necessarily prove anything. But as I said earlier, I do think independent journalists and activists should find these people in the public space and say, hey, can you tell us what your association with Jeffrey Epstein was? And some of them have been questioned, but many of them have not been. And I think that's if we're going to worry about like what comes next and accountability, I mean, I have very little hope that there is going to be more accountability than, okay, Ghislaine, you went to some prison for a little bit, but two of the main people allegedly killed themselves, and Les Wexner's walking free. And to me, that's getting a little bit higher on this sort of hierarchy of this Epstein network. The celebrities, if they were involved in abusing children, the politicians, yes, let's hold them accountable. Let's bring that to the light. Let's get that information out. But we shouldn't assume that being on a list means that, and we shouldn't settle for just getting a couple of the small fish, so to speak. Like this network still exists. There's no reason to believe that any of the blackmail, any of the manipulation has ended, which is why I think the title of Whitney's book, One Nation Under Blackmail, is so important, because that really is what we're witnessing.
That's right. And you mentioned the academics. I think one that kind of like blew people's minds, I think it might have been 2 years ago, was Noam Chomsky. He was another one that met with Epstein after he was accused the first time. So
absolutely. Yeah. And he's still, I think the response, because Wall Street Journal did reach out to him, and he said something like, I don't know you any answers. My meetings with private people are none of your business. And it's like, on one hand, I get it, but it's like, bro, you're hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. You probably owe the people an explanation.
That's right. Yeah, that one was kind of like, a surprise, I think, for, if you're left or whatever, like for lefties, like, and for people who have admired like Noam Chomsky for like years. But it just goes to show you how these circles are not as far apart as we would imagine. Like you think about someone in academics and you're like, well, what would they have to do with someone like Trump or Epstein? But as you said, to your point, he was trying to collect as many people as possible. This whole point about blackmail, do you feel that the sole purpose of him doing what he was doing was to solely blackmail people? Or do you feel there was something else going on there as well?
I think that the blackmail is clearly a central piece of that. Not to get too esoteric about it, but I mean, the abuse of children is one of the most heinous crimes, and these are young girls. Like these are people who were being preyed upon specifically, like Ghislaine and Epstein, did go out and look for women who were young girls who were mainly in poverty, who came from like broken homes. And so they were targeting women specifically, targeting young girls. Like they didn't just go look random places. They went and got people who they probably believed could be manipulated, maybe low self-esteem, lack of family support. And they start offering them money and traveling, telling them they're going to travel and all sorts of things. I think that perhaps, at least for, let's say, Epstein, maybe that the people, whoever he's working for, didn't care about the abuse only in so much as it allows them to have blackmail on people. But I think it's clear that Epstein and Maxwell gained some, or I don't know, there was some sort of sick part of them that enjoyed this. Like this was, I don't think for them that it was just some kind of intelligence operation. I think they were being used by intelligence assets above them, who realized this Epstein guy, for whatever reason, because by all accounts, he may have been a brilliant guy, but also some people said he didn't seem that bright in the first place. It was like he was just put in this place to play a role. And he's collecting people. He's meeting people like Noam Chomsky. He's promising them funding. He's doing all this stuff. But then there's also all the horrific tales of using sex toys on these young girls and just all the, the stuff that we know that was going on. So I think that there probably was some piece of Maxwell and Epstein that was getting pleasure and sick, twisted pleasure out of this, in addition to that added layer of getting blackmail on politicians that could be used against them later. And we know that there, again, Ehud Barak, former prime minister of Israel, like there's a lot of Israeli connections to this whole thing. And we know that the Israeli intelligence apparatus is one of the biggest, strongest in the world, from spyware companies to Unit 821, Unit 81, the Talpiot program. It's one of the biggest intelligence networks in the world in this tiny country. And they're also, more specifically, some of the graduates of these programs, they're starting more tech companies now than almost any other country except for the United States. So this tiny country with this massive spy apparatus and intelligence network, they're getting their graduates to go out and start tech companies where they can gather even more details and more information on people. So I think Epstein, because also most of the abuse that we're discussing in Epstein's case would have been in the 90s, maybe going back further, but for sure the 90s, the 2000s. Epstein's arrested in 2005. He's released. The whole thing's over by 2008. Then again, he's arrested in 2019. And we can assume that abuse continued in those 10 years. So this was taking place in the 1990s, the 2000s, going back a bit of a ways. So there likely were politicians in that time period. We look back at world events and how many of those events may have been shaped by tapes that they have of people, involved with Epstein in some way. And that could have shaped various geopolitical events that we may or may never even really truly get the truth about.
That's a really good point. And I want to know, what is the difference here, do you think, between that first arrest in 2005 and the one in 2019? Why is it that after that arrest in 2019, that's when they decided that, this is Epstein, you got to go?
That's another great question. And it's also so many Trump supporters will try to use the fact that Trump was in office and say that's what changed. Well, what happened is Trump came into office and then, they went after him. But in fact, for those who understand the way the law works and the way investigations work, they don't just pop up overnight. These are like ongoing investigations that take months and in many cases years, including with Jeffrey Epstein. The people that I would credit for the second arrest would be Bradley Edwards, the attorney who was fighting for the victims for the last 20 years, but also, of course, the victims, the survivors themselves, that they chose to not shut up. Like Virginia Roberts and others, and who have kind of come and gone. Some have chosen to stay private and be anonymous. But if they had given up after 2005 and watching the sweetheart deal and all the stuff that happened back in Florida, a bunch of politicians working together, lawyers working together, we have emails from that time. Again, this is in my documentary from 2018, so this has been out for a while. It's just the public doesn't really know. They show that there was this totally fabricated deal in order to give Epstein very minimal time at jail. He basically just had to spend the night at the county jail. He still got to go back to his house and still received appointments at the time, still received quote unquote massages. So the abuse was probably still ongoing while he was serving out his quote unquote jail sentence. And they allowed him to have his own private security and on and on and on. So I think that what happened was that the victims chose not to shut up. They had an attorney who continued to fight for them, and that continued over and over through the years. I mean, this guy has been pretty relentless, and I think he's still involved with helping some of the victims, because actually folks might not realize, but there's still cases going on related to Epstein. Actually, a case against Jay Staley, I believe is his last name. He's one of the executives at JP Morgan. We know that JP Morgan was helping Epstein launder his money through their banks. So there's still potentially details like that that might come out. But yeah, I think that's the major change, because what people will point to, Trump supporters will say is, well, Trump passed an executive order, I think in 2019 during his first term, which is true. He did pass an executive order related to human trafficking and was trying to allocate more resources to that. Great. But there's no evidence, no indication, no attorney involved in the pursuit of Epstein has ever said, thank you, President Trump, because without your support, this wouldn't have happened. Trump himself has never claimed responsibility for, playing a role in the arrest of Epstein. So I think just to kind of debunk that idea that it wouldn't have happened if Trump hadn't come into office. In fact, these investigations were going on for quite some time. Like I mentioned, I went to a court case in 2017. These cases were ongoing in the background. It's just the average person wasn't paying attention. Then one day, Jeffrey Epstein's arrested. And so everybody thinks it just kind of popped up out of nowhere. And like Trump sent the feds to go get him. This was the result of a long line of investigative procedure.
All right. Well, Derek, thank you so much for your time. Can you tell everybody where they can follow you to find your work?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. My main website is theconsciousresistance.com. This is where you can find my books, documentaries, articles, podcasts I've been producing since 2013. I contribute weekly articles at The Last American Vagabond, working with Ryan Christian and Whitney Webb. And those are the best places to find my work, theconsciousresistance.com, thelastamericanvagabond.com. And of course, you can find me over on Twitter or other social media. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much, Derek.
Talk to you soon.
Bye. All right, guys, that was Derek Bros. Please make sure you follow his work. If you like what Whitney Webb does, I'm pretty sure you're going to like his work as a journalist as well. Again, they do work hand in hand together. So I hope you guys like what you heard from him. Again, we'll continue following, of course, this Epstein story. And I don't know, man, we'll have to see what happens. We'll have to see. That being said, I am stuffy. If you guys can't tell, I do have a wicked cold. So I'm going to try to flow through things pretty smoothly. We still have other stories that we do want to, I want to cover tonight as well. But if you wonder why my voice sounds the way it does, that is why, because I do have a wicked cold. So getting better though. It's better today than it was Friday. And Friday evening was pretty tough. I'm not gonna lie, but I've been sneezing my head off, man. Sneezing my head off. Okay, but the theme tonight is cats out the bag, ladies and gentlemen. We do have other things to discuss, but I do want to go ahead and shout out the chats over here as well. Thank you, Nikos. Oh, this is a thread of chats. Okay. Hello, I think it means Sabby. I am from Greece, a conservative country, and I lean center right. I will never forgive the left for what they did to entertainment. That's interesting. However, I see that you are a reasonable person who is willing to listen to the other side and wants peace like me. That's why I support you. Imagine that. Interesting. 3. You once asked Scott Ritter what the Democratic Party needs, and I'll tell you, it's reasonable people like you and Brianna Wu. Well, Brianna's not reasonable on Israel. Different Brianna, you guys, not Brianna Gray. We're talking about Brianna Wu. I hope I'm going in order here. 4. Regardless of your stance, President Trump told exactly what we were all thinking. We will not be dragged into World War III because of this retard. And we'll go to 5. Thank you for this. I live literally in a shithole of a country. Europe is the same. I see Russia with its beautiful cities and villages, and all I hear from lunatics like him is that you need to go to war for democracy. Interesting. People are seeing it, guys. People are seeing it. That's 5. Let me see if I can get to 6. 2 years ago, 2 trains collided with each other. 120 people died, and my government decided it was best to leave it and send money to Ukraine. Enough. Okay, so what I'm hearing here is that he's in Greece and they're running into some of the same issues that we're running into here in the United States, right? Where our government is choosing to use money and funds for other countries instead of helping people here. That's what it sounds like to me. Let me go back to the other chats here. Oh, I did that one. Sorry. Thank you for this one. Side note, I suggest you call my fellow Greeks, Alex and Alexander of the Duran, to guest star on your show. I've recommended you to them. They are great. Oh, the Duran. I've watched them before. I'll try to see if I can get them on. I'll have to find a contact for them. They're pretty good. Thank you, Kyle. Watching on the Green Line in Boston, freezing my butt off outside. LOL. Guys, it's cold. Like a couple of days ago, it actually warmed up a bit. Like we were by warm up, I mean 40s. We were in the 40s and I was like, yeah, it feels great outside. It's 40s, like 42, 43. I was like, that's what I'm talking about, right? But that was very short-lived, and now it's very, very cold again. So I feel you, Kyle. Shout out to Pitchforks Are Coming, who's been a member for 26 months. Canada has signed gas/oil and other contracts with the entire planet tariff-free. Interesting. Thank you so much. I want to give a shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. Really appreciate you around here. Fam, what? If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories. Ultimate, Sabinators, there's Sabsters. Yes, there are. Don't forget about those Sabbies. They're doing the damn thing too, as usual. Yeah, buddy. And of course, we also have members. All of their names are listed here. And you can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen on the ticker. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate you, fam. And I'll have to shout out new patrons on Tuesday. I have to go through my list very quickly. If you haven't done so, ladies and gentlemen, start us off right by smashing that like button. Thank you. If you're new, don't forget to like, sub, and share. And that's right. Our every other Sunday show is back, you guys. I know I've been busy the past couple of weekends, so that's why you guys haven't seen me on Sundays for quite a while. But we're back. And tonight's show is Cats Out of the Bag. So we just talked about Jeffrey Epstein, that so-called Jeffrey Epstein sham, the cat's out of the bag with that. And now we're moving on to this next story here, which I think is going to give a lot of people pause if you haven't heard about it. If you live in New York, I think this is really probably going to bother you, most people. And that is the story about Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo has decided to make an announcement. It appears that he is going to run for mayor of New York City. I kid you not. Yes, Andrew Cuomo, the same guy that had all of these sexual harassment allegations, the same guy who's known as the nursing home deaths guy. Oh, yes, that Andrew Cuomo is deciding to run for mayor of New York City. I kid you not. You have to see his announcement, you guys. This is incredibly cringe. The audacity of this guy. Listen to this.
Hello, I'm Andrew Cuomo. Let me start by telling you what you already know. New York City is the greatest city in the world. There is no other place like it. And as in life, we have had times when we are at our shining best. And there are times when we struggle and endure great hardship. But we also know that we can handle a crisis, because we have. We recently did it together through COVID. And we know that the first step towards solving a problem is having the strength, having the courage to recognize it.
So, hello. It's interesting he wants to bring up the pandemic. You're talking about all of these people that died under his orders, under his watch. We're talking about all the people that died in the nursing homes because of the instructions that were given by Andrew Cuomo. This man literally implemented actions that killed people, and he has the nerve to come and run for mayor. Like, you cannot make this up. And I will say this. If Democrats want to be serious about anti-corruption, which they're not, as a party, they're not. But if they wanted to be serious about anti-corruption and they want to call out Republicans for being corrupt, you can't support people who are corrupt. And Andrew Cuomo is the epitome of corruption. That's the funny part. Meanwhile, you have Hakeem Jeffries, all of these other politicians that are Democrats that are saying, well, yeah, seems like people in the district really do want Andrew Cuomo to be mayor. Really? Because that's not what I've heard from people in New York City. The epitome of corruption. He has no shame.
And we know that today our New York City is in trouble. You feel it when you walk down the street and try not to make eye contact with a mentally ill homeless person, or when the anxiety rises up in your chest as you're walking down into the subway. You see it in the empty storefronts, the graffiti, the grime, the migrant influx, the random violence. The city just feels threatening, out of control, and in crisis. These conditions exist not as an act of God, but rather as an act of our political leaders, or more precisely, the lack of intelligent action by many of our political leaders. But New Yorkers know the simple answer of what to do when there's a crisis in leadership. You lead, you act, you do. I had the honor to serve the public in every level of government. In my 20s, with my father when he was governor, with Mayor David Dinkins on homelessness, with President Bill Clinton.
Yeah, that's not a bragging point right there with the Bill Clinton. I would have left that out of the conversation. But look at the look on his face there. It looks scary, doesn't it? Yeah, it looks scary. It looks very concerning. But as you can see, as I said before, he comes from a political family.
Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, where we worked with cities all across the nation. And as New York State Attorney General, and as your governor. I know government can make a positive difference, because we did. Was it easy? No. But together we achieved historic, progressive accomplishments. We did things they said couldn't be done. We changed lives by setting the highest minimum wage in the nation, a 66% increase. We saved lives by enacting the toughest gun violence protection laws in America. We created new families by leading the nation in passing marriage equality, which established a new civil right for the LGBTQ community and set a new standard for the country. We created the best paid family leave program, enshrined Roe v. Wade into state law 3 years before Trump's Supreme Court ended a woman's right to control her own body, enacted the most aggressive green economy program in the country, and highest minority business participation. We showed that government can actually work and get things done.
Yeah, like killing people in the nursing homes. I mean, this is just the audacity of this guy. The audacity of this guy. Don't forget, this guy had to apologize multiple times. One was for the nursing home deaths, and the other one was for the sexual harassment suits. So don't forget, for a number of people who are saying, oh, he wasn't really guilty of anything, he came forward and publicly apologized. Now, all of a sudden, people are forgetting this. Pay attention to something else that he's doing. He's also trying to use this word progressive. Now you are starting to see corporate politicians pretend that they are progressive. And you've seen it before. It's not just Andrew Cuomo, right? But here he is trying to convince you that he's a progressive politician. He is corporate, corrupt, and grimy. The sad thing about all of this, after everything that I told you, he could still possibly win because of big money interest. Because Andrew Cuomo is not going to say no to AIPAC. Andrew Cuomo is not going to say no to like Blue Cross Blue Shield, any of these health insurance companies. He's not going to say no to that. He's going to say yes to big money because he's corporate and he's corrupt. This is where he's always been, as far as I've known. So with the big money interests, he can still win. That's the crazy part about all this, guys. That's the crazy part. People will still vote for him. I'm not kidding. Not kidding at all. Now, there is an alternative to Andrew Cuomo, which I'll show you in just a second. We're going to fast forward because I don't want to put you through all of that. But we're going to fast forward to about 10 minutes here. Okay, yeah, here we go. Up. Here we go. Watch this. Because you know what's coming, right? Watch this.
Not from our elected officials. In fact, they should be condemning it. The law must be aggressively enforced, and our New York should go even further and be at the forefront, leading the fight against the global rise of anti-Semitism. But to do any of this, we need a government that can actually perform.
So what he's telling you there is that they want to lead the charge of censoring and silencing people that are anti-Israel. We got to keep it real. We know what this is really about. That's coming from Andrew Cuomo. No different than Eric Adams, by the way. Eric Adams was the same way on this particular issue. So remember that when it comes time to vote for New York City mayor. Let's continue.
We need a government with leadership that can take a stand and get things done intelligently, professionally, efficiently, effectively, and do it now. To me, the founding premise of a progressive Democratic Party is all about serving working men and women.
So do you see what he's doing? He's using that word progressive again. So again, see how he's trying to claim himself as progressive now? Remember, the very beginning of these whole progressive politicians, at least under Justice Democrats, was that they didn't take corporate money. They did not support the state of Israel. So do you see how the Democratic Party have allowed, actually Bernie Sanders and them, Bernie Sanders and Justice Democrats, they have allowed corporate politicians like Andrew Cuomo to identify as progressive, even though they don't meet the fundamental progressive principles. That's why, and people can disagree with me on this, but that's why the quote unquote so-called progressives should be a separate party. Because when you go into that party, and at the time I supported that strategy at the time, but it's not working. When you go into that party as a progressive that is owned by billionaires and the donor class and the military industrial complex and lobby interest groups like AIPAC, when you go into that party, you're being thrown to the wolves and you're not owned by those same entities. So as a result, you either have to get in line and shut up if you want to keep your seat, or they'll put up big money to get you out of your seat. And what you are seeing along the way is that now any Democrat can just show up and say, I'm progressive. And they don't even agree with the progressive principles. They can just say they're progressive because they're not the Donald Trump Republican. Everyone write this down, timestamp this. Everyone needs to pay attention to what is happening in the Democratic Party, how they are co-opting the word progressive, just like they co-opted the BLM movement. That is what has happened.
But the cruel irony is they are the ones now paying the highest price for New York's failed Democratic leadership. The affordability crisis, the madness of the mass transit system, mainly affects the poor and middle class, and 75% of the victims of crime are black and brown. This is not progressive policy, but in fact, regressive policy. FDR, John Kennedy, LBJ, Mario Cuomo, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama.
Do you see what he did there? We'll go back to the people that he's calling progressive. Watch this.
And 75% of the victims of crime are black and brown. This is not progressive policy, but in fact, regressive policy. FDR, John Kennedy, LBJ.
Okay. And then, of course, he brings in his father, right? So, of course, you're going to mention your dad. Then Bill Clinton and Barack Obama.
Mario Cuomo, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama taught us what it meant to have a true progressive government.
Okay. So now he is saying that Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were progressive. Bill Clinton was the furthest you can get away from progressive. Remember, he moved the Democratic Party further to the right. Bill Clinton was against progressive principles. Don't forget that Bill Clinton had an issue with Congress members like Dennis Kucinich at the time and called him the crazy progressive. See, people forget these things. Look it up and you'll see. So now it's just anybody who's a Democrat is progressive now. They just threw them in. Now, Barack Obama, to that credit, he ran on some progressive policies. Remember Barack Obama when he ran in 2008 and said we need to end the wars in the Middle East and all that kind of stuff? He ran on progressive policies, but he didn't implement them. But now according to Andrew Cuomo, they're now progressives. So do you see what happens? This ideology has been co-opted by the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is now saying that anybody who's a Democrat is progressive. And now the term progressive doesn't mean anything. I warned about this 3 years ago. 3 years ago on this show, I warned that if the squad members in Congress and Justice Democrats, the organization, don't differentiate themselves between the Democratic, them and the Democratic Party, that this was going to be a problem in the sense that the Democratic Party was going to co-opt the word progressive. And that's exactly what has happened. So now, if you say that Bill Clinton and Barack Obama are progressive, then what does that make the people who said they were progressive, who came from Justice Democrats? What does that make Rashida Tlaib? What does that make Ilhan Omar? Now they're seen as fringe, extreme. Even Hakeem Jeffries has referred to himself as progressive. So everybody pay attention to what's happening there. They're trying to find a way to push out that type of politics in DC and also on the local level here in New York. We'll go on a little bit more here. I don't want to drive you guys crazy.
It wasn't about rhetoric, but results. Look at the word. Progressive government makes progress. They focused on issues that mattered to people in their day-to-day lives, issues that were relevant to them. And then they actually made life better for people. And that is what Democrats must do once again. New York birthed the original progressive movement, and it worked. It lifted this city, this state, this nation to new heights. And it is time for its rebirth. And the place is New York, and the time is now. My philosophy as an elected official is simple. I work for you, not the politicians and not the special interests.
That's a damn lie. He definitely works for special interest groups, so he's lying again. Yes, this is a long campaign video. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I also thought it was what a hell of an ego of this guy to make a campaign announcement video for mayor that's like 17 minutes long. Like, wrap it up, bruh. Wrap it up. But long story short, he is running for mayor of New York City, ladies and gentlemen. So again, the cat is out of the bag. People have been wondering if he was going to run for president or if he was going to run for mayor. Now, Now, Cynthia Nixon, this is an interesting one. Cynthia Nixon is, of course, heavily against this. Cynthia Nixon isn't just an actress. A lot of people know her from Sex and the City, but she's also an activist. She also ran for office. A lot of people forget this unless you are in New York. She said that Andrew Cuomo himself is a walking crisis. If you thought Adams' corruption made him vulnerable and beholden to Trump, you can't begin to imagine what Trump will have on Cuomo, who already had to resign once from office in disgrace. So here's another thing, and I'm going to point this out. If you are a Democrat and you're pointing fingers at Donald Trump for his corruption, and then you're turning around now and you're cheering for Andrew Cuomo, you're full of shit. Because corruption knows no political party. You can be corrupt and still be a Democrat or Republican, but be consistent. And I'm seeing this happen. At least Cynthia Nixon here is being consistent. But I have seen on social media people are not being consistent. So if you're saying that Donald Trump is corrupt, but you don't think Andrew Cuomo is corrupt, let me show you something here. That goes to show you it's partisan politics and not actual corruption. I just want to remind everybody, everyone keeps bringing up the sexual harassment claims, which some people say, well, it wasn't really what people thought it was, etc. Whatever. He came forward publicly and apologized for what he did publicly. So there's that. But there is also the nursing home situation. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to let this go. Andrew Cuomo's Pandemic nursing home fiasco shows the ethical perils of pandemic policy making. For those who forgot, this was 2021. But you're not going to forget over here, folks. You're not going to forget over here. Here we go. Cuomo's fall from grace is a cautionary tale of the perils of his policy making during a public health crisis. Making the right decisions in the early days of battling the pandemic is incredibly difficult, and leaders shouldn't fear retribution for tough choices they made in good faith. Goes on to say, yada, yada. Then we'll come down to this part here. Here we go. Cuomo wasn't alone in prohibiting nursing homes from discriminating against patients that were infected. Officials in other states with similar nursing home policies face criticism, but managed to avoid career-threatening blowback. Hospitals were truly overwhelmed, and data has shown the nursing home transfer policies were not the sole or primary drivers of the pandemic nursing home deaths. The number of deaths that may have been caused by the policies remains unclear. So let me get to this part. But then Cuomo hid the data. Cuomo got such positive press as someone who was a straight shooter, particularly in contrast to somebody like President Trump. Lying about the nursing home data is antithetical to that and caused a real problem. That's coming from Michael Gasmano, a professor of health policy at Rutgers University. And it goes on to say Cuomo's office did not respond to questions about his administration's nursing home data reporting. So later on, what people may not realize is that he did come forward and apologize for this. And then also he wrote a book. So after all these people died in the nursing homes, he was able to not only make a profit. Think about this now. He went forward and wrote a book. So he was able to profit off of their death. They died. He got paid. It goes on to say that, I just want to get to this part right about here. Did I skip the part already? Oh, sorry about that. Here it is. Cuomo's team also proceeded despite early compelling evidence that nursing home residents were especially vulnerable. The first known cluster of this in the U.S. happened in Washington. And they talk about what happened in the Washington nursing home. It goes on to say here, as criticism mounted, Cuomo effectively rescinded the nursing home transfer policy on May 10th. But by that time, again, like I said, it was already too late. This is the big one. This is the big one, you guys, when it comes to Cuomo, is the nursing home deaths. That a lot of people, they want to forget about that. They want to pretend like it didn't happen. Now, there is someone running against him, right? Because many of you are thinking, well, who else do we have? This gentleman who was on Brianna Joy Gray's show, his name is Zohran Kwame Mamdani. Listen to what he had to say.
I want to tell you about who we're running against. A guy who cut Medicaid and stole money from the MTA, who says he's fighting for the working class but showered his rich donors with tax breaks. And when he was accused of serial sexual misconduct, spent years hounding the women who spoke out. No, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Andrew Cuomo.
I was grateful that he supported the campaign.
Cuomo says he will not be returning any of Donald Trump's money.
Now he's decided to move from Westchester to New York City with the promise of leading us through the chaos of Donald Trump. But Andrew Cuomo is the chaos.
The governor sexually harassed multiple women.
Intentionally delayed releasing COVID death numbers at nursing homes.
Profited on a book while others were dying.
From our subways.
Claustrophobia, panic, heat exhaustion.
Is Governor Cuomo raiding New York City taxpayer dollars at the expense of the MTA?
To our schools.
Cuomo has cut taxes on millionaires, estates, and banks while reducing spending on public schools.
To the hospitals that could have saved more lives during the pandemic.
I would call Governor Cuomo probably the single most important person in terms of the drive to close down hospital beds.
Time and time again, Andrew Cuomo has put billionaires and book deals before you. And he's waited this long to announce his run for mayor to avoid answering why.
I thought your question was stupid. Let's try not to be obnoxious.
I think New Yorkers are hungry for a different kind of politics, one that puts working people first. And that's exactly what our campaign is doing. So every door you knock, every dollar you donate, you help us take one step closer to building a city that working class people can actually afford.
Okay, so he is also running for mayor of New York City, and he announced before Andrew Cuomo did. Again, Brianna Joy Gray interviewed him. Go check out that interview. Now, I want to bring up something else. I know people are saying like, well, what about third party independent? Why isn't that guy running third party or independent? You know why? Because of Andrew Cuomo. You know who made it more difficult for third party and independent candidates to run in New York State? Andrew Cuomo. He's the one that made changes so that these candidates, like a Larry Sharp, had to get even more signatures. They made it more difficult. See, a lot of people don't realize that. Andrew Cuomo actively made it so that third party and independent candidates would have a hell of a difficult time even getting on the ballot in New York. It was always difficult, but it was easier than it was after his policy change. That's why, and a lot of people ask this question, that's one of the reasons why Jill Stein this time around wasn't on the ballot in New York State, because of Andrew Cuomo. And even RFK Jr., who was able to get on the ballot in New York State, was then removed from the ballot in New York State. So everybody needs to understand that's where that comes from. It comes from him. The sad part about all this, I said pout. You guys have to excuse me. I have a bitter cold. Sorry. The sad part about all this is like people will still vote for him. After everything that I just showed you, after everything that Andrew Cuomo did, a corporate, corrupt politician who didn't even live in New York City, by the way. And for those who are new, who don't know, I'm heavily against a candidate moving to an area that they do not live in just so they can run for office. I never agree with that. Never agreed with that. But here we are, folks. Andrew Cuomo is running for mayor of New York City. Let's go to some of the comments here. Why people have a problem with Zelensky not wearing SUP if his country in war, but don't have the same feeling for Elon Musk. He appeared, I think you're saying not wearing a tie. He appeared in the Oval Office multiple times with no suit. I think Elon should have to have on a suit too. There's no difference there for me. There's no difference there for me, but I hear you. Thanks, Joanne. Looking good, Sabby. Those are great colors on you. Thank you, because I feel cruddy. I feel like crap. Oh, man. Lauren, Sabby, do you think he'll win? Probably, because of the big money interest. He's going to have the money to have a lot of ads. So that's where that's going to come from. Thank you, Janice. Sad thing is Cuomo will probably win. NYC voters suck. I still didn't understand why people voted for Eric Adams out of all those people that were running. Thank you, Hobbs. Thanks for Derek Bro's interview. Steve Poinconen from AM/Wake Up Next. Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, Derek was pretty base. Thank you, KN/Kareem. Sabby, people in NYC like him regardless of his issues. I live in Brooklyn, New York. Many people I know are voting for him. He also gave us stimulus when he was governor. Yeah, I think that's going to be the reality too, like to what KN just said. Like, I think a lot of people are still going to vote for him. So Skylar said Democrats are co-opting progressive the same way conservatives and white liberals co-opted woke. Ooh, burn. Skylar, burn. Thank you, Marlon. What if we as so-called Black population all register as independent, then ask our Arab and Muslim population to do the same, then ask all the people below 120K per year salary, what percentage of the electorate would we hold? So I 100% agree with this, Marlon. I'm registered as an independent. I encourage everyone to register as an independent. You might think that doesn't make a difference, but it really does. Because when they look at the data, it's like, oh, wait a minute. There's more people as independents now than Democrats, Republicans, or et cetera. I agree with you there that more people should register as an independent. I don't know the math, though, to answer your question. And Kip DR, Cuomo doesn't even live in New York City. No, he lived in Westchester, which is right above like New York City, but he moved. You have to live there. So he moved to New York City so that he could run. And I'm heavily against that. I don't agree with that. Let's get the Rockfin comment and we'll go to the next story. All right. Thank you, Roger, for the tip on Rockfin. No New York Health Act. No New York Public Banking Act. No Invest in Our New York Act that would have taxed the rich at least completely. These are really good points. No unqualified immunity abolition. You were the head of HUD. So how in the world did you allow the rent to get so damn high as governor? No minimum wage that kept us with the cost of living. These things led to New York State being number one in income inequality decade plus straight. Yeah, these are good points. He disbanded the Moreland Commission set up to investigate corruption, which he said was independent and set up after a whole bunch of Democrats went to prison for corruption in the Senate after getting voted into office in 2008. He said they're so independent that they could investigate him. They said, okay, they open up the books on him. Then he ended it. Cynthia, I support you run as an independent. He's talking about Cynthia Nixon. And thank you, Dave. We will see if a combination of journalism and organizing can take us through the fire this year. Good luck to Sabby and Eric. All good wishes. Be careful. This next period is going to be real ugly on street level in what we see around publicly. All best to Sabby, Eric, Sabby people, and RBN this year. Godspeed. Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate you, fam. Appreciate you. All right. We're going to move on to this next story. This is interesting as well. If you haven't done so, go ahead and smash that like button. Thank you. And this next story is what I would like to call owning your shit. Okay. Like I'm owning this. I'm owning my mistakes. And I think that's important for people to do. I do that as well. Right. I was very surprised that it came from a presidential candidate's running mate. It appears that Tim Walz had a recent interview. Yes, apparently Tim Walz is still doing interviews. Kamala, not so much. I think she should. But Tim Walz is doing interviews. And in this particular podcast, he is questioned about what could they have done differently? What can they do better? And to my surprise, Tim Walz actually admits where they went wrong. This is, and I was surprised by this, and I think you're going to be surprised too, because this is not what we're hearing Kamala say. Like, Kamala Harris is nowhere to be found for interviews. She's attending Image Award ceremonies, right? She's going to plays and all that kind of stuff. But even though you lost, you should still continue interviews at this point in time. I think that's just the right thing to do. And this podcast that Tim Walz went on to, I mean, this isn't a large, it's not a big platform, right? It's a smaller podcast, but he went on there. I believe he already knew this young woman based on the beginning of the conversation when she said, you know, I text you. So apparently they already knew each other. But he went on to a smaller podcast, which I think more politicians should do. I know Rokana does this, not so much for a lot of the other ones. But listen to where he accepts responsibility here. Listen to this.
I mean, you guys have a lot more power. Like, one of the things that I always fault Democrats for is that, or at least I looked at Republicans, you know, during Biden's administration, we saw Texas really, and Florida, really just be like, we're doing our own thing. Yes. Now, and Democrats can do that to a certain extent, right? I mean, they may be punished. Yeah. So talk us through that.
Yes. And look, I hear the thing out there is that when we get back, which we'll fight. I'll tell you what people are going to expect is they're not going to expect us to tinkle around the edge with the ACA. They're going to expect universal health care. And if there's a lesson here, I always said this, we had a 1-vote majority in Minnesota when.
Okay. Did everybody hear what he just said? What people are going to expect from the Democratic Party. That part is especially crucial. I'll play it again. We'll go back just a little bit. Again, for those just joining, I'm so sorry that I have a cold, but here we go.
Yeah, right. I mean, they may be
Yes.
punished. Yeah. So talk us through that.
Yes. And look, I hear the thing out there is that when we get back, which we will, we'll fight. I'll tell you what people are going to expect is they're not going to expect us to tinkle around the edge with the ACA. They're going to expect universal health care.
Okay. So somebody gets it. And it's true. People are, especially like after Luigi, right? After like, it's just, we've talked about these issues for how long now, right? These progressive policies, et cetera. But yes, people, after what's happening with the cuts to Medicaid, yes, people are going to expect universal health care. Problem is, Tim Walz is saying this. Kamala Harris should also be saying this, right? Because this is Tim Walz admitting, okay, I here's where I think we may have went wrong. And when you look back at the platform of that particular campaign, no, they were not in agreement for universal health care. Everybody who was following me back then, you remember I went through the entire platform and I said, no, this should be universal health care, not let's expand Obamacare. Biden said that too. That didn't happen. You know, I mean, it's just, yes, at this point, people are going to demand more. So I'm glad that he realizes that. Problem is, the leadership of the Democratic Party and the consultant groups that these presidential candidates choose to work with, they're more aligned to please the donor class, not to please the people, right? I said it from day one. Kamala Harris should have been running an anti-war, pro-worker campaign. Said it from day one. I mean, Bernie Sanders really did create the blueprint for this. It's not like you really got to do any research. You could just look at the videos from years ago from both of Bernie's presidential campaigns. That's what she should have been doing, but that's not who she is. Let's continue. There's more.
And if there's a lesson here, I always said this, we had a 1-vote majority in Minnesota when we moved clean energy, we moved reproductive rights, we moved a whole slew of progressive, very popular, including things around guns and gun safety, very popular things. We moved it with a 1-vote majority. And people ask, well, what do you call a 1-vote majority? A majority. Simple as that. These guys have learned that lesson, and governors have that ability. I'm in Europe trying to foster what I can on the trade. Now, look, if they cut our funding, it's $2 billion, you know, out of a roughly $30 billion state budget. So it is a massive hole that we can't fill alone, but there are things that we can do. There are things that we can push back on. There are things that we can separate. Now, the irony of this is Republicans being all about states' rights until they're not about states' rights.
Right, of course.
We're still establishing ourselves. You know, we're sub-federal level of government, but we have a lot of autonomy. Like I can be invited to the Netherlands to speak. And I said this, Molly, that I'm a rule follower that used to be politics ends at water's edge, means with a unified voice to that. I recognize that the position right now, official position of the federal government is that we're not going to support Ukraine. That's not the majority position of Americans. And you can walk.
Actually, that is in the recent polling, that is the position of the majority of Americans. In the recent polling, that is the case.
That line. And I think that's what we need to do more of. We need to push back. And again, I hope everybody, and I hope Republicans know this, you are teaching us a lot of what happens when we get back and control these, you know, that we need to deliver for people and that's their downfall in this. Where are they delivering for people?
Okay. So this is something that I will say, like he has done this in his own state. There are examples you can point to where you can say Tim Walz did deliver for people in Minnesota, but there's also other examples. Like we can point out the free lunch, right? Free lunch, free breakfast for the kids. We can point to that, but we can also point at examples where he was not good on, right? Like we can point out that stop line 3, which he refused to do. Not good, right? Like, so the way that he treated the indigenous population, that can't be overlooked. That can't be ignored. The way that some of the Palestinian Americans that live in his state have been very vocal about him choosing not to meet with them and ignoring them and only meeting with the Israeli Americans in that state. These are things that are not good, that we do have to point out. He's wrong about the public opinion about Ukraine now. I don't think he's probably even seen the more recent polls, but people have been shifting their position on that because people are tired of these never-ending wars. And we all know that Ukraine is not going to win. So there's that. So he's saying that the Democratic Party needs to do more. And he says, well, when we get back there, we're going to fight. That's where they're not going to fight. Because if that were the case, if they had been fighting all this time, we wouldn't end up here. You guys realize that? If they had been fighting all this time, you don't get Donald Trump for president in 2016. If they had been fighting, you don't get Donald Trump back in the White House again. But here it is back. And by the way, all of us that have complained about the economy, etc., noticed how the mood kind of shift. The economy is still trash. The grocery prices are still expensive. But I noticed some people who were complaining about it under Biden and Kamala aren't complaining about it anymore. Prices still look high to me. I don't know where everybody else lives, but they ain't gone down where I live. So there's those things, right? So there's the partisan dynamics and then there's policy and principle. And the problem with political parties that you run into is that the party needs come first. The needs of the party always come before the needs of you and your district and the working people. That's how it works. That's why you don't get the $15 minimum wage on a national level, which is actually behind what it should be if you adjust for inflation. That's why you don't get that. That's why you don't have the universal health care. And we can go into some of the historical implications about that, about why we didn't have it in this country to begin with, is because they didn't want Black people to have health care in this country because they wanted us to die off. There's a number of things that you can get into, but if we were in the World Series, actually, no. I don't want to jinx the Red Sox. I don't want to jinx them this year. Let's stick to basketball. If we're in the NBA Finals and the Celtics are playing Cleveland, let's say, who do we just play? Let's say the Celtics are playing Dallas, right? Just like we did last time. And we're best of 7. And Dallas has already won game 1 and game 2. That leaves 5 games left. The Celtics are already behind. So even to even things out, you need to come back and win game 3 and game 4 to even it out. That's just to even it out. That's the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has allowed the Republicans to get ahead by that. They've allowed, more in particular, Donald Trump. They've allowed him to get ahead by 2, some may say 3 games, 4 games. They've allowed him to get ahead by that many games. And so the Democrats are always trying to play catch up. And the reality is, if you have to play catch up, you're already at a disadvantage. You're not just behind, you're at a disadvantage. And the problem is, in that particular example, the Celtics should take the lead. The Celtics should be up 2, and the Mavericks should be down 0. They should be the ones that have to catch up, right? But that's not what we have right now. Right now, you have the Republicans are up by 2 games and the Democrats 0. And they're trying to play catch up. Some would even say maybe they're up by 3 games and you're trying to come back from 3, which is especially hard to do. Let's continue.
Other than just angst and anger and taking it out on immigrants or whatever. No egg prices down. Right. Now you got folks that lost their jobs. Now you've got confusion with our neighbors. So I have to tell you, a saying I always said is you lead with good policy and good politics will follow that. And the inverse of that is true. Bad policy will lead to bad politics. And I think Democrats got caught in the wilderness that our policies are popular, but for whatever reason, we didn't articulate it in a way that turned to good politics.
So I have a theory of the case that I have shared with Biden world, and they're very mad at me, that the thing they did wrong was this cautiousness, this fearfulness about interfacing with media, social media, mainstream media. You know, if it's scary, shut it down. If it's too popular, like calling someone weird, shut it down. Talk to me.
Yeah, and look, it far be it from me to critique, because I own this, that it was my responsibility to help get this thing won. And so I'll take my shortcomings on this, but I do think there is a cautiousness around that. I think that we should be more willing to speak to people where they're at. I don't think we should be so worried about, are we putting ourselves out there and going to be asked hard questions? We should be asked hard questions.
Right.
And then we should lead and talk about the things that make a difference in people's lives. And I think people did not know how much better our economy was because they weren't feeling it. I think we left a void that they're going to fill. And you wrote about this, and you know this, Donald Trump's ability. And, I was like, they had JD Vance on every talk show, and most of the time I was like, oh my God, that's insane. But it was something, and people were seeing it, and they were hearing it. And I think for us to get out there now, here's my theory on this.
Let me pause. Was that a nod or a side to Kamala or to Democrats as a whole? When he says that JD Vance is on all these different talk shows and we need to get out there, who's he talking about? Kamala did interviews. I know everybody's going to bring up Joe Rogan. She didn't end up doing that interview. We've talked about that before. And JD Vance also was on Joe Rogan. But it's not just Joe Rogan. I'm just saying, just in general, who is he talking about? Tim Walz was on one interview with Kamala Harris during the campaign, and that was the one with Dana Bash. We all talked about that one, and it was kind of weird because I think they only asked him like 2 questions. It was just kind of weird. He was kind of sitting there. Miss Kiwi says both. You think he's talking about both? Yeah. It's like, I don't know. And I think, and I've said this oftentimes before, that the people they really need to be talking to is not necessarily corporate media. That's a given. They're going to go on MSNBC and CNN, and Kamala did Fox News too. They're going to do that automatically. That's just how it goes. But I think these candidates should be appearing more on independent media, independent platforms. And everybody says Joe Rogan, but I'm talking about even different than that, right? Not just candidates, but also politicians, period. A lot of these politicians don't want anything to do with independent media. You can kind of tell the ones that do because you see their faces. You see them on independent media, right? So you've seen Thomas Massey on independent media, right? You see Ro Khanna on independent media. For the most part, I'm telling you from experience, and I think others can tell you as well, most of them don't want anything to do with independent media. That's part of the problem. We're going a little bit more here, and I'm going to show you Ro Khanna's response.
Let's do it.
And by the way, every single show, all the time. Like you have to flood the zone because people don't. It's not 9 interviews. It's 900.
Listen, it's not linear, and you don't have to get a 10 out of 10 on every interview you do to be out there points, especially if you believe in it. Now, the thing that I'm hopeful is to tell you in this is because I'm hearing it. Where are the Democrats? Where's the leadership? Where's the resistance? Where's all of this? President Obama made me in 2009 when he took office. He had about a 70% approval rating, far higher than this. He had the House and the Senate. There was no charismatic resistance. It was Boehner and Mitch McConnell. But you know what it was, and I experienced this. By the summer of 2010, the town halls, the stuff you're seeing in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, it's organic, and it was people. And the Republican leadership followed this. Now, I'm not going to say all of that was organic. It was funded. It was thoughtful. There were
astroturfed. Yeah.
But a lot of it was relatively organic. And these are happening now in real time. And I think Democratic leadership needs to recognize that, seize upon it. If these town halls and public angst is there, at least get out there and throw some gas on it and get people up, give them something to reason. And then we're going to have to recognize people want to see results. And I think our biggest strength right now is showing them their lack of results. But I hope somebody's thinking this through. What do results look like when we say we take the House back? What's that going to look like? I don't think over the last couple of years, no matter all the great work that I believe the Biden administration did, I don't think it translated much into the mainstream consciousness. And it may be your point on this is we should have just been flooding the zone 100% of the time. I'm an unabashed believer in a shadow government. We don't have the here to do it, but I think we should be doing that.
Well, and I also
Okay, so he brings up Barack Obama, some of the things that the Democrats should be doing. I don't know if they sent Tim Walz out there to kind of do damage control here for the Democratic Party. I don't know, but he's out there doing interviews. This isn't the only one that he's done, like, since they lost the election. However, oh my God, infighting. Ro Khanna saw, I guess, the clip of this interview that Ken Klippenstein shared, where he said, like, people are going to want universal health care. And Ro Khanna said, glad to hear. But where was this during the campaign when you guys went out of your way to reject universal health care? Oh, let's start by admitting the mistakes of a status quo, establishment-led, consultant-driven 2024 failed campaign and platform. Damn. I don't know. That was wow. But Ro Khanna supported them and endorsed them. So keep that in mind. He supported and endorsed. But I don't know if he responded. One second. I'm so sorry, guys. I have a cold. Oh, Blakely responded. I was trying to see if. No, I don't think he did. Okay. I wanted to see if Tim Walz responded, but I don't see it. No, I don't see it. Okay. Interesting, folks. I don't know, man. But apparently the cat's out the bag with Tim Walz. Apparently he's not too fond of what they did. Very interesting. All right, we're going to go on to, we have one more story. Oh, wait, one more? Two more, sorry. Two more stories for you guys. Let's go to the comments. Thank you. Shout out to Lauren, who gifted 5 Sabby memberships. Give Lauren a big whoop, whoop. Thank you, Pine. Elon is dressing like a MAGA version of Roger Waters in The Wall. He is spiraling on drugs and even has said so himself. He loves his ketamine. Damn. Gus says Tim Walz is no longer unburdened by what has been. Thank you, Janice. ACA is a universal healthcare system. Polls use universal healthcare to confuse voters instead of pushing for national health services voters want. That's a good point. And thank you, Marlon. The national debt rate is $1 trillion per year. Elon has been granted double that in the first 2 months of this administration in contracts. Yeah, he's made a lot of money from government contracts. A lot. We'll get into that a little bit more. We're going to dive into the bonus story that we have tonight. And this is breaking news today, ladies and gentlemen. It appears that Israel has publicly announced that they are going to withhold all aid from Gaza as a pushback against Hamas for not being willing to accept a new ceasefire. Now, Hamas has made it very clear that they will return all the rest of the hostages in exchange for the other Palestinian hostages that Israel also has. So once again, Israel is trying to use starvation as a tool. We're going to go ahead and bring in this clip here again. Breaking news today, ladies and gentlemen. Let's dive in here.
Israel has stopped all humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. The Prime Minister's office said the decision was taken because Hamas had refused to accept an American proposal to extend the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire, which expired on Saturday. The proposal included a 6-week extension of the ceasefire to cover the Muslim Ramadan and Jewish Passover periods. The Israeli government backed the deal hours earlier. Let's cross now to Jerusalem to speak to our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams. Hello there to you, Paul. What's the latest on this and what's the significance of it?
Well, obviously, if Israel carries out this threat to stop all aid going into Gaza, that is going to be a serious blow in a place where people are only just beginning to put their lives back together again. Around 4,200 trucks have gone in every week since the ceasefire began 6 weeks ago. If all of that stops, it is going to increase hardship in the Gaza Strip considerably. We don't yet know whether that threat has been carried out, but it's certainly a threat that was made an hour or so ago. And it is.
No, pause. No, we do know that that threat has been carried out. You're going to see that statement from Benjamin Netanyahu in just a moment. But we do know that it has been carried out. And by the way, I want to remind everyone that this admission by Benjamin Netanyahu that he's going to withhold all humanitarian aid from entering Gaza, that is a war crime. Yes, Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal, and this is a war crime. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. People need to understand that even though Egypt in this particular situation, they are dubbed as a mediator, they have come out publicly and they said that they are against what Israel is doing, withholding aid in Gaza. That's nice, Egypt. But at the end of the day, if you're not going to hold Israel accountable, your words don't really mean anything, boo. Because what really needs to happen, we all know the U.S. government is not going to do the right thing for the Palestinian people. I think we've seen this time and time again. However, what could happen is that some of the other Arab nations in that particular area really do need to stand up to Israel. That includes Egypt. That includes Jordan. They need to stand up and push back against Israel. So Egypt, you can make all these statements that you want to about telling us the obvious, which we know to be true. But at the end of the day, if you're not willing to hold Israel accountable, then you're really just, honestly, I'm calling you, I don't know, a bystander. That's what I feel Egypt is right now, a bystander. Because you're not stopping it and you're not offering an alternative. It is illegal to deny humanitarian aid to people during time of war. That is illegal. That is a war crime. Publicly saying he's going to starve the people. Now, I want you to remember that because this isn't the first time. Don't forget, they have done this before. Let's continue. Crazy stuff.
It's part of a negotiating process that is a pretty rough one at the moment because essentially, we should now be into phase 2 of the Gaza ceasefire deal. Phase 1 ended yesterday. We should be into a phase in which the rest of the living Israeli hostages are released. And crucially, Israel starts to withdraw its troops from the Gaza Strip. Israel wants an extension, and Israel says that it is supporting an American proposal for an extension that would take us essentially to the middle of April. We haven't had any word from the Americans. We don't know the exact nature of the proposal, but that is what the Israeli government says it is willing to do. Hamas are saying that they reject that, and they are applying their own pressure. Last night, they released the latest in a series of, frankly, cruel, humiliating videos showing Israeli hostages in captivity, with one hostage, Yair Horn, saying goodbye to his younger brother, Eitan, before Yair was released a couple of weeks ago. Eitan remains in captivity. Clearly, that was Hamas applying what pressure it can on the Israeli government to go ahead with phase 2 of the ceasefire deal. So we are in a situation of deadlock, with each side applying all the pressure and the mechanisms they can, and with no sign at the moment of a breakthrough. All of this, of course, raises the very real possibility that at some stage we may see a return to fighting in Gaza.
So what is ultimately happening here, because he's putting it mildly, I'm just going to give you the business. Ultimately, what is happening here is Benjamin Netanyahu is finding a way to break the ceasefire. And the reporter here says we may find some type of fire again. No. Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to find a way to break the ceasefire. That's what's happening. Again, who is the aggressor? Think about that. We'll go on a little bit more here, and then I want to get to that statement that he gave.
So just to bring the line that has come from Hamas, as you said, you have said they don't respond to pressure. That's what they said in their statement. This decision, Hamas has said in a statement, complicates matters and affects the negotiation process. And Hamas doesn't respond to pressures. A Hamas official there speaking to the Reuters news agency. I mean, the timing of this, in a statement that came from the Mr. Netanyahu's office, there was the line that on the 42nd day, if there were issues, fighting would continue. Where are we on that, Paul?
Well, exactly. I mean, that is what a lot of people think is the likely outcome eventually, because Hamas have shown no willingness to remove themselves as the kind of military power in Gaza, as Israel demands. And Mr. Netanyahu seems determined that the full dismantling and destruction of Hamas is one of his principal war goals. So those two, the two sides are completely at odds, obviously, as they have been all along, on the eventual outcome of all of this. So that is why there is this intensive diplomatic effort to see if there can be some kind of bridging proposal. That, we're told, is what the Americans are offering, an extension of phase one, to allow for the release of all the remaining living Israeli hostages and perhaps some of the dead ones too. There are thought, by the way, to be 24 Israeli hostages still alive in the Gaza Strip, and the release of...
Imagine talking about 24 people left, right? Israeli hostages left in Gaza compared to how many people have been taken, how many Palestinians have been taken.
More Palestinian prisoners. But if Israel is sticking to its position that it will not begin its military withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, then it is very unlikely that Hamas are going to agree to this proposal. There will be a lot of pressure being placed on, I suspect, especially on Hamas from the mediators to make it to make this bridging proposal work. But we're not seeing any sign of success yet.
Okay.
No. And the whole goal, and I want to go ahead and answer Zinful, is the U.S. calling this out. So this news just broke today. This story just broke today, right? So some people may not have seen it yet. If they're not saying anything about it today, you'll probably hear about it tomorrow morning. But either way, independent media is more likely to call it out. I will say CNN and MSNBC are more willing to call out Israel now that Trump is in office. I've noticed this. I think you guys have noticed this as well too. But when Biden and Kamala were there, not so much. But for the most part, I think you're going to have to follow independent media to really call this out. So the cat's out the bag here, ladies and gentlemen. Again, this is Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to find a way to, again, break the ceasefire, and he's doing it by starving the people. I want to remind you, in 2023, he did the same thing, right? Israel starvation used as a weapon of war in Gaza. This is from Human Rights Watch. They covered this in 2023. And I just want to pull up this part right here. They said that the Israeli government is using starvation of civilians as a method of warfare in the occupied Gaza Strip, which is a war crime. Human Rights Watch said today, Israeli forces are deliberately blocking the delivery of food, water, and fuel while willfully impeding humanitarian assistance, apparently razing agricultural areas and depriving the civilian population of objects indispensable to their survival. So I just want to remind you again, because this is not new. They did this in 2023, and also they did it last year. Last year, right before the presidential election, they stopped allowing food come in after October 1st. They've been doing it. In fact, if we're going through the months, it's like they'll let some aid in and then wait a couple of months, and then they'll stop it. And then they'll wait a couple of months and then stop it. So what they're basically doing is they're trying to find another way to strategically kill the Palestinian people in Gaza. This is one of the many ways of doing it, right? It's not just bombing the people that causes them to die. It's also by starvation. It's also by illness and disease from not having clean water, which, as you can see, Gaza is completely destroyed and demolished. In my opinion, it's not livable, in my opinion. But that is their home. So what he is trying to do is he's trying to kill off the remaining people that are there. He wants them gone. Now, he publicly came forward and he made a speech about this. I'm just going to pull this up really. I think I forgot to add it. So I'll just go into Twitter and grab this. Because what he did, Eric, can you go to, I'm sorry, I'm on Twitter and I'm trying to do this on my own and I messed up somehow. Can you go to Netanyahu in Twitter? Just go to Netanyahu's speech. I know it's under Dropside News. So Dropside News, they were the first ones that I saw that posted about it earlier today. And I was like, holy crap, man, this is crazy. And then the speech came later. And I want to tell you something about this speech. I noticed during this speech, Benjamin Netanyahu is not speaking in English, right? I believe he's speaking in Hebrew during this speech. And someone has told me before that there's something to be said for that. Like before, people have told me that when he's speaking in English, he's speaking to a certain group of people. And when he's speaking in, I guess, speaking to the West, maybe, but when he's speaking in Hebrew, it's different. So I want to pull up this clip here. Let me go ahead and show you guys. Again, Dropside News, they said a new video statement as Netanyahu thanks Trump for fully backing his plan, including halting all humanitarian aid into Gaza. So listen to this. And I want to remind everyone as well, don't forget, push this here, because he gives two speeches. He gave one that was in Hebrew, and then he gives one that's in English. Don't forget that even under Biden and Kamala Harris administration, that Benjamin Netanyahu let the cat out the bag, that Antony Blinken and Joe Biden knew that he was going to block aid in Gaza then. That was revealed later on. So this is one of the things, like when people say, well, Kamala and Trump are going to be very different on this issue. In some ways, yes. In every way, no. Both of them have been okay with Benjamin Netanyahu withholding humanitarian aid to people in Gaza. It's now happened under both administrations. And although Kamala Harris wouldn't come out and say this herself, and probably not Joe Biden either, but Joe Biden is a staunch Zionist. He said that himself, but he supported everything that Israel was doing. People have to understand that. Kamala Harris supported what Israel was doing. And when people are running for office, you have to understand that they are going to relay things to you in such a way to get your vote. But all along, don't forget, Biden said that Kamala Harris was a part of all of those decisions, and she was in those meetings for all of those decisions. They both have agreed with what Israel was doing. They both said, what is it? Israel first and always first. The difference that you notice is that Donald Trump was more overt about it. But both administrations agreed with Netanyahu and allowed Netanyahu to stop aid from entering into Gaza. Let's go ahead and get into this statement here.
I want to thank President Trump for his unwavering support for Israel. During my recent visit to Washington, I said that Donald Trump is the greatest friend that Israel has ever had in the White House. And President Trump shows that friendship each and every day. He has shown it through his visionary plan for Gaza. This is a plan which Israel fully supports. He's shown it by sending us all the munitions that were being held up. This way, he's giving Israel the tools we need to finish the job against Iran's terror axis. And he has shown it by fully backing Israel and putting the pressure to release the hostages where it truly belongs, on Hamas. Israel has accepted President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff's plan to extend the temporary ceasefire by 50 days. During that time, we can discuss the conditions for a permanent ceasefire that will end the war in Gaza. In Witkoff's plan, half of the hostages would be released right away, and the remaining half would be released if we reach an agreement on a permanent ceasefire. Again, Israel has accepted this plan, I accepted this plan, but so far, Hamas has rejected it. Hamas had also put forward positions for a permanent ceasefire that are totally unacceptable. Israel has decided to stop letting goods and supplies into Gaza, something we've done for the past 42 days. We've done that because Hamas steals the supplies and prevents the people of Gaza from getting them.
So didn't I show you guys multiple times last year and the year before multiple videos of IDF soldiers burning the supplies on the trucks? Okay.
It uses these supplies to finance its terror machine, which is aimed directly at Israel and our civilians. And this we cannot accept. We will take further steps if Hamas continues to hold our hostages. And throughout this, Israel knows that America and President Trump have our back. Thank you again, President Trump. Thank you for all you're doing to return our hostages, bolster our security, and provide a future of prosperity and peace for all the peoples of the Middle East.
So when he says all the peoples of the Middle, again, he's not talking about the Palestinian people, right? So people have to understand, and I say this because I've already seen people, some of the Kamala stands, who were like, "Oh, don't you guys feel bad for not supporting?" No, because let me make something very clear. I, for one, didn't vote for Donald Trump. I didn't vote for Kamala Harris. I voted for Jill Stein. 2, for the people who are saying, "Oh, it's all you guys' fault because you didn't support Kamala." Those people don't know how to do math. There's that. And 3, I think it's really disgusting that you would try to shame people for not wanting to support someone because of a genocide. Like that is one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen. The reality is, and a lot of people don't want to admit this because they get too many clicks if they don't admit it, but the reality is the presidential election comes down to swing states, correct? Okay. So since the presidential election comes down to swing states, and one of those swing states was Michigan, don't you think it was incredibly important for Kamala Harris to go visit people in Dearborn, Michigan, which she did not do? Don't you think that was incredibly important that she should have gone to Dearborn, Michigan to visit people? Do people not realize that you can't win Michigan as a Democrat without winning Detroit and Detroit suburbs? And in order to win those particular areas, you also have to get the Arab American vote and the Muslim vote. Do people not realize that? Do people not realize that's part of the reason why Hillary Clinton didn't win Michigan in 2016? Because they did not come out heavily to support her. The numbers reflect that, by the way. So for all the finger pointing fingers at people is not going to change anything in the future. All that's going to do is make people more angry. And no one should people shouldn't try to guilt trip people into not supporting a genocide. It is so disgusting. And then people wonder why I don't deal with these fucking parties. This is exactly why, because it's a cult. The reality is Israel is an oppressor and an occupier. They are a problem. What Israel is doing to the Palestinian people is a fucking problem. But it's also a problem that you have these lobby organizations like AIPAC and J Street that funnel all this money to these politicians that make them act on the behalf of Israel. I don't see any of these politicians acting on the behalf of the American people the same way they bend over backwards for Israel. Do you? You literally have black politicians in Congress who will tell you that it's Israel first. Meanwhile, the black people in their district don't even see their face. What? So for the people who are trying to guilt trip, I remind you again, starvation was used as a weapon of war under Biden and Harris multiple times. And all that proves is that both parties support what Israel is doing to those people. Now, whether or not you want to support your party, that is on you. But let's be realistic. Don't come back to everybody and say, "Oh, you should have did this, shoulda, coulda, woulda." Nah, bruh. That doesn't make people want to come out and support you. That actually pisses people the fuck off and makes them turn away from you. Think about that. But that's what's happening, folks. Again, we'll stay up on that story, but you can see what Israel was already trying to do. Sorry again, guys, for the coughing, but here we go. Okay. We have one more story. Let's go to the comments here. Sunlight said, what is the my Cash App? That's right. I never put that in there. Eric added it here. Yeah. So it's just sabrinasalvati too. Thanks, Eric. Thank you for that. Thank you, Hotspot Casino. Here's what's getting me. Israel and Palestine are both in Africa, and both nationalities are claiming something that doesn't belong to either party. Interesting. Thank you, Marlon. Shouldn't they be in phase 3 of the bearded ladies dancing on the beach? God. Thank you, Bose. I believe Egypt's Senor Sisi is paid off by the U.S. So that's another reason why Egypt isn't doing much at all to help Palestinians. Yeah, that's really messed up, because the way I see it, whether they're paid off or not, at some point have some dignity. Thank you, Joe Massino. Please talk about Article 5, the Convention of States. It's going to amend the Constitution, and we can finally get something done. There is only 12 states left to amend. Interesting. I'll have to look into that. Thank you, one maggot brain. Obviously, USA greenlit genocide, and they don't give a damn. Shameful. Yeah. Thank you, 100 Black Roke. Good evening, Sabby. It is pure murder. And many Christians go along with the lie that Israel is the promise for them. Yep. That's right. And thank you, Kelly. How do you know this stuff? You are sharp as fuck. I read a lot. I think I read, if I'm not reading, if it's not a book, I'm usually reading a lot of articles. So I read articles, I think almost every day. So it's been some time. Now we're going to get to something a little bit funny, okay? Pretty funny. The cat's out the bag, ladies and gentlemen. George Galloway and Piers Morgan, they like to go at it. Like, they butt heads sometimes, right? But nothing is as epic as this performance here. I think this appearance by George Galloway on Piers Morgan's show has to be the best one yet. And he's been on there before, but he really handed it to Piers Morgan. In fact, before that show, he put out a tweet that said, if Piers Morgan broadcasts our whole interview and doesn't edit it, he will be seen bleeding on the floor. Metaphorically, of course. I'm not, after all, a Labor MP. So that was George Galloway trying to, I guess, call out Piers Morgan before the interview. And Piers Morgan's response was, oh, it's airing in full. Relax, Putin puppet. So this is another thing, right, where Piers Morgan calls George Galloway a Putin puppet. By the way, like a lot of people who want this war to end, George Galloway's just calling people Putin puppets. So again, he's there for the establishment. He's shilling for Israel, and he's out there shilling for Ukraine, which is basically being a big money laundering scheme, and of course, an adventure for BlackRock. So that tells you a lot about Piers Morgan. But nothing is a takedown like this one. It is so good. So good. So here you have Piers Morgan. I don't know this dude who has his neck up. I don't know why his neck is up like that. I think that's Julian Michaels. That's Sam Cedar. And then there's George Galloway, who is smiling very hard. Let's go ahead and get into it, guys. Here we go.
It's really come to something when, having spent a lifetime myself fighting against NATO and American wars, it's the Americans that are trying to stop the war, and Piers Morgan, Boris Johnson, and Keir Starmer, who are trying to keep it going.
I don't want to keep it going.
A lot of Ukrainian,
I don't want to keep it going.
You've got a lot of Ukrainian blood on your hands. You have lied about this war from the beginning.
Actually, Vladimir,
you have lied about the origin of this war, about the duration of this war, about the course of this war, and now having caused you and your war party the death of 1 million Ukrainians while claiming to love Ukrainians, you're now calling for British lives to be lost.
So that's a really important point there, like that, right? Because one of the things that Piers Morgan has come across as pro-war, whether it was Israel and Gaza or whether it was Russia and Ukraine, he has come across as pro-war. Again, establishment shill here. Piers Morgan, again, like I said, don't forget who his boss and mentor was, which was Rupert Murdoch, right? Who owns Fox News. At one point in time, don't forget, Piers Morgan used to work for Rupert Murdoch. And this show, which is now uncensored, at one point, I think this was part of The Talk, and then it kind of split off into its own thing or whatever. But anyway, the point is this: Piers Morgan exists to protect the establishment and the status quo. And as long as you're pro that, Piers is cool with you. But the moment that you want to push back against that, Piers, his role is to have a problem. And I'll tell you why I said role later on. But let's get back to this.
Load of absolute bullshit.
That constitutes close to a war crime. You're going to regret it when very soon Zelensky is sitting in a beachfront villa somewhere counting his ill-gotten gains and all the secrets of the rampant corruption between the Democrats and the Zelensky regime begin to tumble out of the cupboard. This war did not begin 3 years ago. You very well know that it began in 2014. You very well know that it began with a coup against the elected president of Ukraine, backed by Victoria Nuland and the administration at that time, and supported by you. You very well know that the criminalization of the Russian language, which followed hard on the heels of that coup, was the proximate reason for an uprising in the east of the country amongst Russian-speaking, ethnically Russian people. You very well know that Zelensky and his predecessor rained down shot and shell on the people of East Ukraine for 8 years before Putin intervened.
That part, I'm surprised that George Galloway was able to say as much as he did, because that's the part that I feel like Piers Morgan would have interrupted, is the history about everything. And like I said before, you can choose, like, you can say that you don't like Vladimir Putin. You can say, I don't like Putin, I don't like Russia, that kind of thing, whatever it is. You can say that, but you can't deny the history. And that is what's been happening when it comes to this particular conflict. People always want to start with, it started on day one when this country invaded this one. No, it didn't. And what was really sad, I even saw some progressive commentators making that same mistake. It started that day. No, it didn't. People don't want to go into the history. And I think it is important to know that. So I was surprised that Piers actually was quiet for as long as he was during this part.
2022. And that 14,000 people, most of them women and children, were killed in that onslaught. You very well know that Zelensky was preparing for a final onslaught, a final solution. And while I'm on that subject, you're always telling us how much you love the Jews. You're supporting a regime which puts up statues to Nazi collaborators, to generals of the Galician division of the SS. You are supporting
is Jewish,
a regime.
That part right there. Say it again, guys. That part right there. You are always on camera talking about people being anti-Semitic and you need to fight back against anti-Semitism. And you are simping for a country. And we'll get into this. I'll deep dive into this Tuesday for Tuesday night show. Because Tuesday night, I'm going to tell you guys and show you what is really sad. The black politicians who are simping for a white supremacist country. We're going to get into all of that. We're talking about Ukraine. Yes, it's not like it always a couple of people who might be neo-Nazis. No. I have the letter from Congress that broke this all down, warning people prior to this war with Russia and Ukraine about the rise of neo-Nazism in Ukraine. So yes, George Galloway is correct when he talks about you're out here praising people that have statues of people who were literally Nazis. So you can't be one or the other. Now, Piers Morgan's going to try to come in here and he's going to say, but Zelensky is Jewish. So da-da-da. That don't mean shit. Ain't you ever heard of the term sellout Uncle Tom? That don't mean anything. That don't mean anything. That's like someone pointing to someone like Larry Elder. You guys know Larry Elder? Black Republican in California. He was the one that said slave owners should get reparations. That Larry Elder. Okay, everybody got their sellouts. Every group has their sellouts, people who are willing to throw their own population under the bus for some coin. So that don't mean anything, Piers. That don't mean nothing. Well, I'm not this way because I have a black friend and da-da-da-da. That don't mean shit. What a convenient excuse. Let's continue. We'll go back just a little bit so you can hear that part again.
Of the SS,
Zelensky is Jewish. You know that, right? You know Zelensky's Jewish, right? Do you?
But that's like saying there's no racism in America because Obama.
So so you're calling the Jewish leader of Ukraine a Nazi. Is that your position?
That's like saying there's no racism in America because Obama was briefly the president of the country.
I don't know if I would have used that example, but I see where George Galloway was going with that, where he was saying, like, you can't say that people say, well, this country was never racist because Barack Obama, there's no racism here because Barack Obama was president. I get that, but I think it would have been better if he used an example to show that there are people who are of said population that have been known to turn against their own people for some coin. That's the important part. Everybody got those people. Every population. If you watching me, you know some people in your group too. So let's just keep it real. Everybody know that one person that was willing to say, okay, yeah, I'm going to throw my people under the bus because there's some money or benefit in it for me. All right. So think about that for a second. So I would use a different example, but let's continue here.
The entire western part of Ukraine played a decisive role in the mass murder of Jews and Poles and others in the Second World War. And now they are heroizing the heroes of the SS. Why doesn't Donald Trump agree with you?
Because he's wrong.
Well, you know, you have been up his ass all of these 2 decades.
Really?
You've kissed his feet.
Really?
You've licked his boots. You've fawned upon him.
Really?
You have been his super fan. And now, on this fundamental question of our age, he's entirely wrong. Piers, everybody watching knows you are Trump's biggest ass.
I like him.
Oh my God, that was epic. We got to drop the beat for that one. He says, you were Trump's biggest ass kisser. Can we go ahead and drop the beat, fam? Hey. Dance with me. Dance with me. Move the fuck. Shake the fuck. That was, oh my God, that was epic. I'm sorry. That's too funny. That's just too funny. I'm sorry. Oh my God. Okay, we'll finish up here.
You are Trump's biggest ass.
I like him.
Everybody watching.
I like Donald Trump.
I know you like him.
I like him. And on many things, I like him. And on many things,
fundamental question.
Let me finish.
The biggest question. In politics in the world today, he's got it completely wrong.
No, it's expected.
Ukraine was the most corrupt country.
What, more corrupt than Russia? More corrupt than Russia?
It was designated by the economists,
what about Putin?
by the FT,
what about Putin?
by everyone who knows
what
about
Putin?
These things. I'll tell you what, your mate, Donald Trump, is going to open every book, every drawer, every filing cabinet, and you're going to be embarrassed.
That was probably one of the best takedowns that I've seen of Piers Morgan, because it's so, oh my God. Like, I want people to understand what Piers Morgan really represents. He's there to operate for the state. He's there to operate for the empire, right? He's not there to advocate against that. And he's not there to be anti-war. He's not there, none of that. He's there to advocate for the empire. And that's what he does. And I think that people will finally understand. Again, I don't agree with, I don't agree with George Galloway on everything. But I think on this particular position, he's right. Like, they know that Ukraine can't win. So continuing this war and giving them weapons, that means that you are agreeing to more Ukrainians losing their lives. That means that more Ukrainians will die. That also means that when push comes to shove, either things will escalate and lead us into a World War III, or Ukraine will lose in such a crushing blow, the economy will be finished, and Zelensky will collect his coins and go live somewhere else on some resort island. And the people of Ukraine will be screwed. All because NATO and the US government wanted to tempt Russia. And this all goes back to expanding NATO, which was not supposed to happen. And at least not towards Russia. That was agreed upon after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And so people, when you ask, like, how did we get here? And I always think it's important to visit that. How did we get here? You need to know how we got here. Now, that doesn't mean that Vladimir Putin is right about everything. I don't believe that. That doesn't believe that Vladimir Putin is perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect leader anywhere. But what it does mean is that it is very clear that NATO and the US government, they implemented this. And it does go back to those years that George Galloway was discussing there. Now, there was something else that he said I want to show you. This is after that conversation took place. George Galloway posted, for 16 months, Piers Morgan, Piers Uncensored, has been Netanyahu's chief bitch in the online podcaster world. Yet, according to Tucker Carlson, Morgan, formerly of TV and ex-showbiz editor of The Sun newspaper, hates Israel with every fiber of his being. He is a prostitute. Nothing more, nothing less. I think I responded to this, didn't I? Oh, yeah, I did. I did. I responded with Elmo. I was like, what? Elmo say what? Yeah. So if that's true, what that means is that Piers Morgan is a paid actor. And it's all just for show. That's what that means. If that's true. So, interesting times, ladies and gentlemen. Interesting times. But yeah. I am tapped out, you guys. I apologize. I have a wicked cold. I think Eric is going to come in, I think, and read there's a couple more super chats, Eric. I will answer this one. George had Andrew Tate on. I was very disappointed. I haven't seen that. Someone else mentioned that to me, but I haven't seen it. I'm not fond of the Tate brothers at all. I know they were found, I guess, not guilty, but I'm still not fond of them. I think they're assholes. But I'd have to check that out. But that is it for me today, guys. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Yes, the Sunday show is back. I'll be back live again Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. So I'll see you guys then.
All right. Excuse me. I think I got it a little bit too. Sabby tapping out. All right. We'll let you go. I'm gonna say what? But yeah, Sabby's got a bit of a cold, so we're gonna let her tap out, and I'm just gonna wrap things up here. What I want, there we go. Yeah, Piers Morgan playing his role. I also wanted to show like we had that story earlier. That's on the stage. Okay, wait. There we go. Wait. All right. Here's Elmo. And then, so we were talking earlier about we had who was it? It was Ro Khanna and Tim Walz. Yeah, Tim Walz doing his thing. And I threw on a comment on Twitter. Here we go. I just wanted to show this briefly before we close out. Like Ro was saying, Tim Walz is getting it, and it's so glad to hear, and the Democrats should be doing this and that. And so, the way I framed it is, the role of the Democrats is to act like they're on your side, but they never affect any real changes for the 99%. Because of course it's the uniparty, they work for the billionaires. And the number one job, the role of Democrats is to distract and derail any kind of real left movement. They funnel it off the way Bernie does. And what, those of us on the real left, the real way to defeat that uniparty is to focus on money and corruption and to have clear demands. If you're focusing on demands and not personalities, then you have a roadmap of who's really representing you and who's not. And if you want to see more about that, you can always check out the old, let me bring it up here, the old 11 Demands, and there's also the Substack. So I just wanted to hit that briefly. We'll do a few super chats and we'll close it out. Thanks for the super chat. Marlon Wells, he says, sorry, I just don't believe Israel wants their people back before the genocide is completely done. Yeah, I mean, I think BBC's the getting peace and getting the emergency to be over as time for Bibi to go to jail because they have pending corruption charges on him. So I think, Netanyahu is really trying to run this thing out for as long as he can, because it's crucial to his outright survival. Thanks for the super chat, Nikos, who says, Piers Morgan is a despicable person. The number one problem with the British is arrogance and narcissism, and he has both. To him, every nation has to be stepped on by Britain. That's what they did to Greece. Yeah, I hear you. And, the other thing I would say is just, Piers it's political WWE, right? It's political entertainment. And, Piers has no real positions. It's really just about what'll make good TV. And thanks for the super chat, 72 Marshmallow. So what if Zelensky is Jewish? Havara says that Zionism has always been the right wing. I hear you. Yeah, it's really a childish, unserious point to say, oh, but Zelensky is Jewish, and it's really not too hard to knock down. And thanks for this super chat, Marlon, who says that war was never winnable, but a lot of weapons were sold and money changed hands. Now it's time to cash out. Yeah, I agree with you on that, Marlon. And there's always, the real purpose of the war is the exchange of money, is transfer of money, to the weapons contractor, the MIC, and ultimately the billionaires. You'll notice that everything that happens, whether it's Ukraine or whether it's in Israel, Gaza, Palestine, the billionaires get richer. Whatever happens leads to the enrichment of that top 0.1%. And with that, I think we're going to close it out. Oh, and so on the Tuesday show, I believe we're also scheduled to have Maryland Green candidate for governor, Andy Ellis, on Tuesday. For the interview, it'll be Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. So looking forward to that one. So apologies for Sabby not being here to close out, but she's looking after herself because this cold has been going around. And I just have to find the right thing to clip on because she usually closes this out. Here we go. So on that note, we'll say good night. We'll see you Tuesday. And to quote our Sabrina Salvati, good night and keep up that fight.